of Galatians is a powerful book. We've already seen that Paul immediately gets into his subject matter in chapter 1. That's extremely rare. He does not do that, to my knowledge, in any other book that he wrote or any other letter he wrote. Usually starts off with some what I'd call pleasantries, but he doesn't this one. He goes straight into it. He begins immediately to explain that he really is an apostle. Chapter 2 gives us some insight into why he would do that. Why would he talk about being an apostle? So let's start with verse 1, where Paul in chapter 2 says, "Then after 14 years I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and also took Titus with me." Now, in this case, other than saying again, Paul doesn't mention the earlier trip to Jerusalem. He actually had taken a gift at the end of Acts chapter 11 to Jerusalem, again to the needy saints in Jerusalem. But at that time, we're in the approximate time frame when James was beheaded, and when Peter was thrown in prison, and all the apostles were effectively in hiding. They were not easy to find because of what was going on. And so this reference, it appears to me, and I'll say it with now with more confidence than I did when I was younger, this I believe is the Jerusalem conference. And Titus is probably the young Gentile convert who Paul stood his ground on and would not let him be circumcised. That's my best guess on that. I think there's ample reason to believe that. Verse 2 goes ahead and says, "And I went up by revelation, communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who are of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain." So why did he go to Jerusalem? And you and I'd say, well, because there was trouble at Antioch and he's trying to straighten it out. And of course, Luke lets us know there was a problem at Antioch. But Paul says, I went because the Spirit revealed to me I ought to go. So it may be that there's an element that Luke does not report that has to do with all of this. I can't say that that's absolute, but it looks a little bit that way. That maybe when the conflict came up, and of course Paul and Barnabas immediately stood up to it, they answered it there in Antioch. No, the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised, but the controversy continued, and so Paul is apparently directed by the Spirit to go. That's my best guess, given the information that we have. Now, if you go back to Acts chapter 15, you might want to put a finger there. We may bounce back there a little bit as we go along. But you'll notice what occurs there in verse 2. "Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question." Now notice the certain others. Paul's very specific in the book of Galatians. He says Titus went. He's one of those specifically named in Galatians, but not named by Luke by name. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm getting ready to repeat it. Okay, Mr. Bob is asking if I think that it may be as he makes his journey toward Jerusalem that he may have been thinking about all the persecuting he'd done in the past and so forth. He's a changed man, And I think, yes, it's a possibility. If you're like me, when you go somewhere you hadn't been in years and years, you may have lots of memories, conjured up, so to speak. A couple of weekends ago, when Teresa and I were speaking in Manchester, she to the women, me to the whole group, in case you're wondering. When we were in that area, Teresa's mama came. Well, that was familiar territory to her because of her young life, in that area. And so she has memories that don't come to me, not in Manchester. My memories are all related to recent years. So yes, Paul may have thought about those things as he went along. Notice that he met privately with men of reputation. Now, we're going to see more about this a little bit later, but we human beings have a tendency to think of some people in maybe a little bit higher spot than other people. I'm not talking about necessarily rank, but it may be we really yield to them because of their knowledge or because of what they've been through in life or whatever. These men were in Jerusalem, were highly respected. Who are they? Well, we don't know all of them for sure, but the likelihood from reading a number of passages is that we're talking about at least Peter and John, and then James, not John's brother, but the half-brother of the Lord, is probably who we're talking about. Why did he do that? Well, there are few things worse than to stand up in a public situation and take a position and find out that everybody that knows the Bible at all says, no, that isn't right. So Paul lays out what he's been preaching, and they concur that this is exactly what he should have been preaching, that he's preaching nothing but the truth. Very important as we go on through. So verse 3, he continues, yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Now, if you've read the whole Jerusalem conference, you know that ultimately James is the one that draws up the letter. He's not the only one that speaks by any means. In fact, really, Peter speaks first. Paul and Barnabas both speak, and they're all talking about how God's accepted the Gentiles. That's a clear evidence of everything that has happened. But with Titus being with him and him being a Gentile convert, it seems pretty powerful, and Paul notes it. They didn't even make Titus be circumcised. He was with me at that time. So that's underscoring what happened. But then verse 4, and this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. Okay, the word spy, or the words spy out, according to Thayer, mean to inspect, to view closely in order to spy out and plot against. I don't know if you like mysteries and crime novels, or crime shows, but I'll confess that I enjoy trying to figure out before they tell us who done it, that kind of thing. I enjoy that. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the police in these shows, and I presume at the local level, doing their job, they'll go to the video and they'll track, and they discover sometimes this guy's been stalking this and plotting in this bank for days before he robbed the bank, or whatever the case may be. Paul says these false brethren, and what makes them false? I don't have an answer to that. It could be that they were not sincere when converted. That's a possibility. Or it could be that because of their turn, that he now is going to call them false brethren, because they've turned into error. In either case, their goal was to look for an opportunity, look for a soft spot that they could attack, and their goal appears to be to bring about the demise of Christianity and force everybody back into Judaism. I mean, that appears to be what their goal is, and that's why they have been spying them out, looking for the opportunity. What we need to understand is Christians are free in Christ, and these false brethren, Paul says, want to subject them to the law. Look at the word bondage. Want to bring us back to bondage. What kind of bondage are we talking about when we talk about bondage? I think he's talking about the bondage under the law of Moses. Now, let me be very careful. The law of Moses was written and put forth by God. Was it perfect? Yes. What's the problem then with the law of Moses? It's man. Because man's not perfect. Man sins. And therefore, the law served to put them into bondage. They knew they were sinners. They knew God didn't approve of sin, but they had no way out. Without Jesus Christ, there was no exit. And so these brethren are trying to get these recently freed, that is through Christ, recently freed Christians to go back into bondage under the law of Moses. So, verse 5, to whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. When there are church difficulties surrounding Scripture, and let me be very careful here, because I'm talking about scriptural difficulties. I'm talking about when somebody is teaching error. There are those who will propose we need to just be patient with them. I mean, they're teaching error, but give them a little time. Look, you give them time, they're going to take a whole bunch of folk with them. That's what they're going to do. And so Paul doesn't yield. He won't yield at all. We live in an age when tolerance is among the top echelon of things that people set for. You ought to be tolerant. You ought to be more understanding. No. When it comes to error, you can't be understanding. You just can't afford to do that. If I have heard of people who went, I don't know about to a dentist, but I know about to a doctor. And the doc is getting ready to, he's got to take one leg. He's got to. And literally, he comes in and examines the wrong leg. Well, guess what the patient says? Doc, you're looking at the wrong leg. And I've heard of patients that actually took one of those indelible felt tip markers and put an X and said, this one. This one. Because you can't afford to say, well, I'll just be tolerant. If he gets it wrong, what are you going to do? You still got to give up the bad leg. It's infected or whatever. You got to get rid of that. So now you're legless, if you go that approach. We got to watch out when it comes to Christianity and realize that we cannot afford, in any sense of the word, to yield. Some people would say, well, let's temporarily give them what they want. Let me warn you, people that will pound away to get some little thing, when they get that, they're going to want the next thing. They don't stop. They go down. They take this step, and then they're going to want to go the next step. And you yield to them one time, and they think they've got you. Now, if you don't believe that, then probably you've not yet been blessed with children. My experience with children, if you ever say no and then turn around and say, well, okay, you let them cajole you into it, well, you are about to become the chief listener to cajolers, because they'll pick up on that real fast. If we just hammer away long enough, mom's going to yield, or dad's going to yield. That's what they come to. Well, the same thing's true when it comes to the gospel and defending the truth. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. All right, now I'm going to read verses 6 through 10. You may think, well, that's a long reading. You've been reading one verse at a time. Let me explain why. In the Greek, in the original, verses 6 through 10 are one sentence. I only know of one sentence longer in the New Testament, and that's in Ephesians chapter 1. And I think that one's 14 verses long. This is only 5 verses long, but it's a pretty lengthy quote here. And I read one author that really knew Greek, which I know how to look it up. You know, that's my talent. But he said there's something like 95 words in Greek, and there are all sorts of parentheticals and commas and things like that allow him to keep going. So here he goes. But from those who seem to be something, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. God shows, makes no difference to me. God shows personal favoritism to no man. For those who seem to be something added nothing to me. But on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised had been committed to me, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter, for he who worked effectively in Peter for the apostleship to the circumcised also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. They desired only that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I also was eager to do. By the way, remember, he was converted from being a Jew. So guess what he knows all about? Taking care of the poor. That's a very common thread under the law of Moses. They were required to take care of the widows and the orphans, and even the stranger. Always they would take care of them. So Paul said, I was eager to do that. And that's understood that that's part of Christianity. I back up a little bit, and now let's pick up little things that were in those verses. But from those who seem to be something, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. God shows personal favoritism to no man. For those who seem to be something added nothing to me. That one verse is a mouthful in our English translations. Those who seem to be something. Again, I want you to know this is apparently what men thought. These were the leaders in the church at Jerusalem from the view of men. And that's fine. Paul said, it doesn't matter to me. Why not? Because God doesn't show partiality. The word, if translated literally, would be God doesn't face receive. And we've seen that before in our study of James. You may remember in the sermons we've been doing, talk about no face receiving. Christians are not to be face receivers. If you turn back to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 16, you'll remember probably that God told Samuel to go to the house of Jesse because he was going to anoint the next king. And you'll remember that Jesse brought all of his sons, and here comes the firstborn, Eliab, and Samuel thinks in his mind, oh, this has got to be the king. You know, he must have looked like a king, maybe looked somewhat like Saul in the sense of build and handsome nature and those kind of things. So, we don't really know. But the answer that God gives is very, very powerful. Verse 7 of 1 Samuel chapter 16, when it says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And if you think about the life of Christ, and we've just, not that many months ago, studied the entire book of Luke, And if you think about it, how many times did Jesus know exactly what they were thinking? You never see Jesus saying, well, you're not one of the popular folks, so you can't come with me. You're not really pretty, so you can't come with me. And so you don't see him doing that. Why not? Because he looks at the heart. God looks at the heart. That's what is critical here. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17, Moses wrote about those very things when he said, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe." Now, if you start putting these verses together, I want to suggest to you that they are an argument against predestination that usually is not used. But they do argue against it. God doesn't show any partiality. Well, if he doesn't show partiality, how could he possibly choose some to be saved and some to be lost? That sounds pretty partial to me. If I came to your house and you were feeding, you said everybody can eat except Gary, I'd feel like somebody's been partial. Wouldn't you? Sure. Well, God is not partial. He does not show a partiality. Now look at Romans chapter 2, where the Apostle Paul picked that theme up on another occasion. Of course, writing to a church that so far he's not gotten to go visit. And what does he say to them in Romans 2:11? For there is no partiality with God. Now, is he the only one that saw that? Turn over to Acts chapter 10. The Apostle Peter is at the household of Cornelius, and he has had that vision, remember? Sheet let down out of heaven 3 times, and everything in the sheet was apparently an unclean animal under Jewish standards. And the voice said, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter said, "No, Lord," said, "nothing common or unclean's ever touched my lips." And the Lord comes back and says, "Don't call anything I've made common or unclean." Well, 3 times he sees that. And when God does something 3 times, he definitely wants you to remember it. I guarantee you. So here Peter goes and to the house of Cornelius, and really, if the Spirit hadn't told him to go, I question whether he'd have gone. Because Peter was a Jew, and he thought the Jews were God's people, and they were the only ones that were God's people. But he gets there, and listen to him in Acts 10, beginning verse 34. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality." Then he goes on. "But in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him." You want God to accept you? He's not partial. You got to fear him and do what's right. By the way, is it not pretty clear those are conditions to salvation? That here we have a covenant, and in the covenant you have promises, or at least one promise, and conditions. Always. All covenants work that way. You don't believe me? Just think about some covenants you've made. You ever sign on the dotted line for a car? They promise to give you the car. You promise to make the payment every month for the rest of your life. Well, not quite. 72 months now or something like that. I don't know. Some people go. But you just had a promise and conditions. As long as you make the payments, you get to keep the car. Quit making the payments, lose the car. Same way here. God expects you to do right. Do what's right, you're in. He's not going to be partial in your direction. But he's not partial in anybody else's direction either. Do what's wrong, he's going to punish you, me, whoever. It's just the way that God works. So Paul is not the only one that observes that. Notice that Paul goes on to say, these men who seem to be so highly thought of by folks, said they didn't add anything to me. They didn't add anything to his education. The Lord had already educated him. The Lord already taught him what he needed to know. He met the Lord face to face, not when he walked on the earth that we know of, but he met him face to face on the road to Damascus. And perhaps beyond that, I have no way of knowing what happened when he went into Arabia and those kind of things. I just can't go there for sure. So we've got this idea that Paul says, I am an apostle in the same right, on the same level as Peter and John and the others. How does he prove it? Well, it's easy. It was decided after, remember earlier in the chapter, he said, after I told them what I taught in private, what did they conclude? You're God's apostle to the Gentiles. Peter's God's apostle to the Jews. That's the conclusion. Which one is more powerful, more important? Neither one. Both doing the same job. With different people, I'll grant you that, but both doing the same job. And that's a part of what Paul underscores in this lengthy discussion that he goes through. And notice that because of this, they extended to them the right hand of fellowship. And they say, we're partners. We're partners in the same work. That's the idea. When you extend the right hand of fellowship, you're saying we're all partners together in service to the King. That's exactly what they had done. Now, Gentiles would care for the poor, which, of course, Paul had already done. Acts chapter 11, 27 to 30, we already observed that a little while ago. He said we were going to do it again. He was eager to do that. And in fact, if you look at, for example, Acts 24, guess what he's doing? When he gets in trouble, going to Jerusalem, in part, he's carrying that contribution, the second contribution, for the Judean saints. And he says so in his defense. That's what I was here for. I was only here to bring alms to my nation. And yet they arrested him and wanted to kill him. That's what he goes on to say. Romans 15 talks about that as well, that great thing that he did and that the Christians did among the Gentiles. Okay, let's look at verses 11 through 13. These are the ones that you've heard about sometime, somewhere. Now when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James. Let me pause a second. It's on my mind for a different reason, but remember, a bishop is to be blameless. Okay, what does that mean? Well, this gives you an indicator. He sinned, he had not corrected it. Had Peter sinned before and corrected it? Yes. So that's not brought up. That's gone. It's put out of the way. But in this case, he's got a sin, and he hadn't dealt with it yet. So now I'll pick back up. Sorry. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who are of the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. I want you to listen to what Brother Jackson said, Wayne Jackson, in his New Testament commentary. Peter came to Antioch as a result of his experience with Cornelius. Peter knew there was to be no distinction. In fact, he said that in Acts 15, Jerusalem Conference. And that's what is referred to here. No distinction between Jews and Gentiles. And he had mingled freely with Gentile Christians when he first came. But when certain Jews who arrived from Jerusalem, and Jackson inserts his comment, who quite obviously did not share the socialization view. They didn't think it was okay to socialize with Gentiles. He withdrew himself, being afraid of the circumcision faction. Unfortunately, even the generous Barnabas fell under Peter's influence. And to me, that has got to be one of the saddest statements in all of Scripture. That the son of encouragement played the hypocrite. Now, by the way, if you picture that in the original language, what it means, they were like actors on the stage. They acted like they weren't going to associate with with the Gentile. When the reality was they had been all along. It's just a game. They're just playing it so that they won't be criticized by the circumcision party. That's what's going on in this case. So, verse 14. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? First thing I want to notice, Paul did not run around and talk to all the brethren about what a terrible thing Peter had done. He went straight to Peter and stood right in front of his face. Do you notice that? I think that's very important. This talking behind people's backs and telling, even if it's true, it's not valuable. It doesn't help the church. So Paul went right to him, stood right in front of him. Now, what did his actions say? He said, he says, look, even the Jews could not live up to the law. Look at Romans 7, and you'll see that where Paul says, well, now the law was a good thing. It showed me to be a sinner. One problem, no way out of sin under the law of Moses. And so when he gets toward the end of the chapter, verse 25, he says that his deliverance came through Jesus Christ our Lord. And Peter knew that, and Paul is driving that home. Peter had been unable to keep the law perfectly, and yet he was trying to require the Gentiles to do what he could not do. And Paul, right there in front of him, saying it, and you got to appreciate him. He does not back down. 15 and 16. We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Christ Jesus, that we might be justified by faith in Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law no flesh shall be justified. Peter and Paul lived under the law, but could find no means of forgiveness under it. And they weren't the only ones. Nobody could, as far as that goes. Instead, our justification has been effected through the redemptive mission of Christ and our obedient faith in Him. No one, either Jew or Gentile, can be justified by the works of the law. And that's exactly what Paul has just said in his writing to these Galatian Christians. So he continues in verse 17. But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, is Christ therefore a minister of sin? This is one of those verses where I had to read and think on it. But here's what came out to be after all my study. Jews who turn to Christ acknowledge their own sinfulness. Everybody that comes to Jesus acknowledges he's a sinner. You don't need a Savior if you're not a sinner. And you could look at Romans 3, and Paul develops that very thoroughly in that chapter, twice saying that basically everybody's guilty of sin. And finally, when he gets down to verse 25, what's the solution? The solution is propitiation. The solution is Christ. And maybe we ought to look there a minute. There's a neat word there that really is powerful for us Christians to remember. So we'll pick up there. Verse 24, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Now that word freely is in the news. It really is. You know what it means? There was no quid pro quo. In other words, I could not give back something equal to what God did. That's why it's called grace. God did something that was beyond my ability to do. And I couldn't pay Him back for it. No, he goes on. Whom God set forth as a propitiation by His blood through faith to demonstrate His righteousness, because in His forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed. All right. The quid pro quo is payment in kind. In other words, you give me something worth $25, I give you $25. That's payment in kind. You can't do that with sin. I can't, there's no way I can repay God for the gift of His own Son's death. I can't do that. It's not within my ability, nor is it within the ability of any other man, as far as that part goes. So instead, He sent Jesus to be the propitiation. And in this place is very interesting. The Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament Scripture, uses this word, here translated propitiation. Guess what it stands for in the Greek translation of the Old Testament? Mercy seat. Mercy seat. And if you look at your margin, some marginal readings will literally have that in the marginal reading, mercy seat. Well, that's where Jesus paid the price. Jesus died on the cross. He took His blood to the throne of God, the ultimate mercy seat, and He gave that blood there so that you and I could be set free. It's a pretty beautiful image, isn't it? So how are we set free? We are set free through Jesus turning. So what happens to people that turn away from Jesus? And that's what Paul went into. Notice what he says. But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are found sinners, is Christ therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. So what's the point? Turning away from Jesus only made Him the one through whom we became aware of our sin. I said make, it should be made, if you want to modify that in your notes. My typist makes a mess, a lot of times, but just try to follow the gist of what we're talking about here. So, you see, when I turn away from Jesus, what has Jesus done for me? He helped me understand I was a sinner in need of a Savior, but when I abandoned Him, all I am is a sinner. Because I gave up the Savior. I can't be set free anymore because I put Him away. Now that sounds very familiar. The Hebrews epistle includes in chapter 10 a very similar argument. When beginning at verse 26, he says there remains no more sacrifice for sin. God only had one sacrifice to set me free. Guess what it was? The blood of Jesus. That's it. And if I turn away from that, I'm in trouble. And that's why he said, certainly not. And by the way, usually when it's translated in English, certainly not, it's a double negative, which in English is a no-no. You don't do that. But in Greek, a double negative means no, not at all. That's what it means. See? And that's what we've got here. Certainly not. All right, verse 18. For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. The law was torn down because it could not take away sin. Think Colossians 2. Taken out of the way, nailed to the cross. Why? Because man couldn't get rid of his sins that way. Returning to the law would require rebuilding it. And Jesus nailed it to the cross. But you'd have to rebuild it. And when you rebuild it, what's going to happen? You're going to be hopeless. Because there's no means under law to get rid of sin. So you've rebuilt the thing that's going to destroy you. I was trying to think who that was the other day. Talking to somebody that has a very, very sick individual that they love very dearly. And they say, the thing that I just cannot understand is how somebody dying with COPD can insist on smoking. But they do. They do. The very thing that should have been torn down their life, done away with, they might have survived had they have done that. They go back to it. And that's the idea here, at least from my perspective. All right. So then he goes on in verse 19. For I, through the law, died to the law that I might live to God. Now here's the beauty of it. Here's Paul, who knew all those Old Testament prophecies. He'd seen all through the time, Messiah's coming, Messiah's coming, Messiah's coming. By the time he gets to 1 Corinthians 15, what does he tell us? The scriptures tell us that he was going to die, he's going to be buried, and he's going to be raised again the third day. So the law showed Paul how to be set free. But how was that to take place? In Christ. So the law taught him how to die to the law so he could live for Christ. That's really what he's arguing here in the 19th verse. So verse 20, everybody's read it and knows it. Probably sung a song about it. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. By the way, that could be faith of the Son of God. Maybe well translated that way. And if you think about it, when Jesus went to the cross, didn't he demonstrate faith in his Father? That the Father would deliver him, that he would not remain in the grave? I think he showed a lot of faith. So there are two faiths here. There's my faith in Christ, and then there's the faith of Christ. And they're both in this single verse. So one, buried with Christ, dies to sin and the law. And the big discussion of that is Romans 6. If we got another minute or two at the end, I'll go read that because it goes hand in hand with this. By the way, a lot of teachers, the old teachers of these books, Romans and Galatians, said that Galatians is little Romans. And there's a sense in which it is. All right, verse 21, we finish the chapter. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. If I could have gone to heaven without Jesus dying, then Jesus died for nothing. That's the point that he made. So there are serious consequences to the notion that the Mosaic system is still binding. Number one, the grace of God is nullified. Didn't need his gracious gift at Calvary. Number two, Jesus' death was for nothing. And that can't be. And that's Paul's argument. It is a beautiful chapter. It's sad because of what Peter did. But if you read on in the rest of Peter's life, and particularly 1st and 2nd Peter, it appears that he got it right and he kept going. And aren't you glad? He became an elder, so does that mean he was blameless? It does. So he must have gotten rid of this blame somehow. He must have repented of what he did. Thank you.